So let's kick off with the imposter syndrome thing. I mean, it's an interesting topic. I heard there's some very interesting stuff on another podcast the other day about imposter syndrome, and I heard the guy talking, and I thought that what he's saying is correct. In my judgment, in my view, is correct about what imposter syndrome is in people. But I feel like he missed some really pertinent points on it and some real depth in it. And he was certainly talking about it from the perspective of somebody who's heard about somebody who's had imposter syndrome and may have read up a little bit on it. And as you know, kind of this is what it could be. And I just know that certainly I feel like I've had it. I have it all my life. And Steve, you touched on it a little bit there, and a little bit earlier around the sort of fear of who says I can do this? Like,
yeah.
Like how am I going to be able to do this? Am I able to do this?
Yeah.
When am I going to fuck this up?
Yeah. Can I pitch it? Can I
yeah,
say?
Of course.
I mean, I think it's an interesting one. I think for me, imposter syndrome is one of those things that, it's another one of those labels, isn't it? It feels like something that exists out there. Let's say this man's got imposter syndrome. And we'll come up with like a whole kind of raft of things that we can do in order to treat his imposter syndrome. But actually, for me, it's very straightforward. I think my own sense of imposter syndrome comes from a deep-seated sense that actually I'm not good enough. That I just don't feel like, and I know from my own experience where that comes from. That comes from a childhood situation where I was very often told, you're not good enough, and you should be ashamed of yourself. And what do you know? And who do you think you are? And I've had to fight to kind of get to a place of going, well, actually, I'm Steve Carr, and I have something to say. But it's been a journey, and I think there are men and people who have different ways of looking at imposter syndrome. And I think my judgment is we all have something running through us that feels like not good enough. I think that's part of my human condition. I judge part of the human condition. But
Steve, sorry to interrupt you there, man. I know are you sitting next to an open window by any chance?
Yeah, shall I close it?
Okay. Yeah, I think there's a breeze blowing through on your microphone.
Can you hear my wisdom now?
Yeah, well, I mean, all of those pearls of wisdom, they were popping right through. We just wanted to hear it a little bit clearer. Yeah. We wanted them to shine a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, man. Well, I'm just saying, I just know where mine comes from, and I think it's really very straightforward. And that's part of the work I've done. I speak in public every day in my teaching life. I lead. I do lots of work which is outward facing, because I've been on the journey of thinking, well, you're not going to shut me up. I've got something to say. But it is underscored with, who do you think you are? That's my own take on my own imposter syndrome. Doesn't mean it doesn't show up. It does still. But that's part of the journey that I'm on.
I would like to come in there, Steve, if that's all right, on the back of that, because it's kind of similar to my experience of not thinking that I was good enough to do anything, to rescue or to save or to heal or whatever. My father was mentally ill, and he had a really big episode when I was about 11 or so, and he got taken away. He got taken away by the police and in an ambulance, and it was pretty traumatic. And I used to think that was one of the reasons why I thought I wasn't good enough. But and I kind of grew up with that, and I took that into the police when I joined the police when I was 18. And there was a sergeant at the Scottish Police College saw something in me that was like, we were doing this mock court presentation or something, and he saw that thing in me that I think you're talking about, that I'm not good enough. And he said that, he says, I was taking things too seriously. Like, I was very critical of myself. And I was so critical of myself that I was stopping myself from learning and from enjoying and from taking part, from exploring and doing something new. I had never stood in a real court case with my, giving evidence, never mind a mock court case or trial at the Scottish Police College. And when he said that to me, it kind of made me realise and change. And I started to play. And I ended up being conditioned by the police service and conditioned by teaching. I went into teaching after 17 years in the police and became conditioned. So I learned how to overcome that. But I agree with you. For me, it's kind of still there. And I'd never really heard of imposter syndrome before. And it was recently I'm in a group of women who are a writers group. And women suffer from imposter syndrome a great deal, according to the reflections that I've experienced from this group that I'm in. And it was explained to me what imposter syndrome is, and I'm not good enough, and I'll never be good enough, and I shouldn't be here. Who do you think you are to tell me anything? So, and that was stopping me. That was stopping me from writing. That was stopping me from creating and from playing in the same way that it stopped me from playing all those years ago when I was training in the police. So it's kind of like hidden behind a veil of that secrecy that I'm not good enough is underneath that. And it's taken me some time to have people reflect back to me, just like your story there has reminded me, Steve, of my experience as well. And that opens things up. But for me, that opens things up, and it's scary because it's new and it's different. So I'm just taking baby steps with writing and being creative and stuff like that. And I'm really, really grateful for it. But it's something that I think I do suffer from. And I'm embarrassed by that. I'm embarrassed to even say that, to admit that that's maybe something that that holds me back. And it's all just a belief anyway. So it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, all just a belief anyway. So that's very
it's just a story.
Just a story, just a belief. So it doesn't really matter. Moving on.
So yeah, I'd like to share my experience of it. So I spent most of my life feeling not good enough, and I find it really interesting. I'm really interested in the archetypes. So the damaging message for the sovereign is you're not good enough. I had a very, very deflated sovereign, and from how that was showing up for me was I wasn't looking after myself. I wasn't encouraging myself. I wasn't proud of myself. I judged that my father wasn't proud of me. That makes me want to cry. I really wanted my father to be proud of me. And do you know what? He was, but he just didn't say it. He would always say when he wasn't proud of me, but he wouldn't say when he was. And it was interesting, when I moved away from my village that I grew up in, my friend phoned me up one night and he said, oh, do you know what? Your dad was at the pub last night and he was saying how proud he was of you, that you managed to get this job and you're renovating this place in Scotland. And I was just gobsmacked on the phone thinking, why aren't you picking up the phone to me and telling me I need to hear? I've always needed to hear this, like deep down inside. It showed up in so many things. I wasn't confident in social situations. I couldn't ask a girl out when I was younger. Anything in work, I would constantly tell myself, you're going to get this wrong. You're going to make a mess of this. These people don't think you're any good. It was pretty constant. And the interesting thing is once I'd done a couple of pieces of shadow work on my sovereign part, it quite quickly flipped completely the other way to, I'm amazing and I can do everything. And whilst that was great to go on that journey, there's also a story in there where, where's the balance? I can't just, like I did a bit of training on something and I decided, well, I'm just going to start teaching people this myself. I think I can do this. I'm just going to crack on and do it. And it's like, take a step back, Ash, you're great. Yeah. But, let's get all the things in the right place. Let's get planned and organized. And so yeah. So I don't have that problem anymore. I feel like I can talk to anyone and say anything. And I still remember how teenage Ashley was, how young Ashley was, not wanting to show up at all and just wanting to disappear into the background because I felt so damn uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks, man.
There's a bit of, sorry, Joe, go on.
I can pick up and run with that because I had a similar experience to Ashley as well. And that was really, really challenging. And the way I kind of consider the imposter syndrome is there's that critic piece, I think, that Thomas mentioned, the inner critic, that inner voice, which I got really, really strong messages from through my childhood and through my school life of you're stupid and we don't understand you. Literally, we can't read what you're trying to talk about here, trying to communicate. And that inner critic voice, like we're joking about beliefs, they're just beliefs. And they are just a story we make up in our head, but they're driving the car, right? They were driving the car and they were driving like unaware. So that certainly tripped me up. And I think that was a big part of my my inability to grasp moving towards happiness and balance through happiness. And it was pleasure seeking or adrenaline seeking or substance seeking or relationship seeking or thrill seeking or seeking, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And the same, I resonate with Ashley as well. Like I after my NWTA weekend and winding up my business and selling it on, you know, I left, you know, like 30, right, I'm fixed now. I've got my stamp of approval, NWTA qualified. I've had a first startup scale, sold it. I'm fixed now. Right. I'm off to go conquer the world. And yeah, crash and burn right back into my old patterns but with more time and money on my hands. So actually it was a gift and a real disaster in some ways. And the way I frame that up now, 10 years later, of that inner critic is trying to give it a character. And this is how I work with clients sometimes as well, and say, can you have a character on the inner critic? And I ask them, you know, what does it look like? What does it sound like? What's the context and the setting? That's tricky sometimes. I give them the example of mine. Like I imagine that my inner critic is up in the kind of in the cheap seats of an auditorium, you know, up at the back in the dark, and they're heckling down. There's this voice that heckles down at me, and it reminds me, you know, you're not good enough. You're not worthy enough. You're not worthy of love. So why bother trying? And that's the uncomfortable bit that I don't like to share about myself. That's the reality of my inner monologue, and it was driving the car for a long time, even though I wasn't conscious of it, because I was covering that up with a load of running from it or hiding from it, hurting a lot of people, including myself, along the way, not taking care of myself. And that excuse me, that heckling bit, that's that inner critic, that's that voice. And to finish up, what's interesting about the little metaphor for me is that, like, if I'm on the stage of my life, like I'm acting out my life, that heckler, it's not even on the stage. You know, they're not here doing the hard yards. That's that inner voice which is coming from someone which is not even on the stage with me. And that's how I now kind of work and recognize that. And sometimes people can create their own awareness of that voice and what it's saying. I hope that's maybe helpful to anybody listening. And that's my piece on that.
Yeah, thanks, man. I'm sure there's always more. And I'm glad you touched on that, too, you know, because it's like inner critic is a word that gets thrown around a lot in sort of psychological terms, and you know, this can be such a detailed scientific explanation of it that oftentimes I find it confusing, where actually what it really means is I feel like I'm a piece of shit and I'm just not good enough. And it's sort of been implanted for various reasons, and it shows up in different ways. But inner critic is another way of describing it, because, or a bully, right? And even to some degree a predator.
Yeah.
Because it just turns around and it starts wanting to feed on me from the inside. And I can just deeply resonate with parts of all of your stories. And one thing that I'm picking up here, which I like, because for me it's the same, is that we're very, very familiar with this. But it's one of those things that we, as a bunch of men here, have been able to keep and put in front of us. So it's not controlling us anymore.
No.
And that's certainly the case for me too. And where it shows up for me a lot, and I resonate with bits and pieces of all of what you men have shared. And where it's showing up for me quite a lot recently is in financial areas. Like, can I provide? Am I going to be man enough to be able to support? And then, am I man enough in a relationship? Am I good enough? Do you know what I mean? Am I going to be everything she needs? And maybe I'm too weak. You know what I mean? I'm less than. Maybe she wants something that I don't have or that I'm not. And it's just, it's crazy. It shows up in all sorts of ways. And when things are going really well, it shows up by wanting to kind of sabotage me a little bit as well. Do you know what I mean? By going like, wait, hold on, why is this going so well? This is not meant to be happening, right? And it's, at one stage I thought I was bipolar, because I'd go through stages where I'm just this deepest, darkest piece of shit that's no good. But on the other hand, I'm fucking awesome. Do you know what I mean? And you literally can't touch this, right? And like everything I do when I'm in that space turns to fucking gold. So there's this real kind of dichotomy and this massive, massive paradox. And I see a bunch of successful men in front of me, and it's often people. My sense on it is that everybody has it to some degree. That everyone has it to some degree, and if they say they don't, then they're just not paying attention to it. They don't know what it is, because in some of the definitions, it'll say that it's really successful people that have imposter syndrome. I think that's true, but it's not just really successful people that have imposter syndrome. It doesn't matter how successful I am. If I have that imposter syndrome and it's unconscious and it's driving me, as you mentioned, if it's driving the car, and it's that belief, which we joked about, and we joked about it because I certainly joked about it because I recognize that a belief is a powerful thing. It's not just a belief, right? It's like literally rewiring all the circuits. But no matter how successful I am, I'm just never good enough. I'm just never, ever good enough. And when it's unconscious and it's driving, it's affecting everyone, and sabotaging. That's my take on it. Yeah.
I've got something else. It's like that inner critic for me has a very definite voice. And sometimes I think that voice is interesting in it now. You talk about the I, who am I? And what are the bits of me? What are the parts of me that make up kind of what I do, what drives me, what moves me forward. And there's a bit of me that sometimes believes this, you're not good enough, who do you think you are, is my voice. But actually a lot of the time when I actually sit down and think about it, I think, well, actually, that really sounds like the voice of my father.
Or somebody else, like a teacher or something.
Well, it's my dad for me, you can be a teacher. And it's like, you're not good enough. So actually the work for me is always like, well, hold on, what's going on? I like Joe's idea of the heckler. It's kind of, it overlaps, and I have to go, actually, I have to separate that voice out and go, actually, that's not for now. That's something for then. And I have to really work hard, often on a daily basis, to go, that voice that says I can't do it, that's not the voice of now. That's the voice that was. And it's about really being clear. And I've done all sorts of journaling around that. And I'm very clear now, but actually, you know what? That dialogue is not the dialogue that belongs to the present day. That's a dialogue that belongs to something that was. But it still arises in me because it was embedded, as Brad says so eloquently, from when I was young. It's right in my blood and bones. So I still have to do the work. But once I can separate it, actually, then I can really begin to kind of move forward. And as you say, Brad, it can be really crippling for some people. They just don't feel they have a right to exist at all. Incredibly shy and closed down. And so, it can be really tricky. It's a posh word for actually a very difficult situation for lots of people, me included. But
the danger, I think, my assessment of the situation and thinking back on my experience as well, and what I see in a lot of other people is when I first feel that way, and I know that I'm feeling like shit and that I'm talking to myself that way, I don't know that it's okay to talk about it. I don't know that it's okay that other people are experiencing that. I feel like it's just me and I don't fit in here, and I can't fucking tell people that. Do you know what I mean? Because I don't fit in and I'm ashamed, and I really think that they're going to criticize me. They're going to, berate me. They're going to all of these sorts of things. It's akin to like death. How strong that feeling is. It's like, I have to keep this to myself. No one can ever find out that this is how I feel.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of, that's the real kind of twisted, tricky piece on it, right?
Yeah, I want to jump back in and say, actually, we need to, I believe that this voice also comes from a place of wanting to keep us safe. But the language,
Oh yeah,
the language of it is kind of stay still, be quiet, don't move. But it's the language of fear.
Yeah.
And that wants to keep you safe is part of understanding it. Sorry, Ash.
Yeah. No. I was trying to butt in because I got something so important to say. So I often work on this with my clients. So separating out that inner critic voice, you know, what are the words that come through, and often they're quite horrible, they're quite vile, and I then repeat them back to my client. And I say it in quite a strong way, you know, you're never fucking good enough. What you do is just absolutely shit. You have to stay silent or quiet or whatever their words were, because otherwise, and I ask them to finish the sentence, they've always got the answer. You know, otherwise my sister will beat me up. Otherwise my mum won't just give me a cuddle at the end of the night. They've always got the story. It's always in there. And for me, that's the key, to then separate that out and say, as you were saying earlier, Steve, that story kept me safe when I was a child, because otherwise I would have got annihilated. And that's gone now. And my dad isn't here right now, and he's not going to criticize me. The only person that's criticizing me now is my internal critic that's just gone inflated and crazy. I don't want him to have the power anymore. I want to take it back.
I think there's a lot in what you've just said there and what Steve has just said. For me, and Bradley too, I would like to jump in, because going back to what you mentioned, Ashley, about it's an identity wound. You know, it's in the sovereign. It's a I am not good enough.
Yeah.
And for me, when I first started doing this work, I was quite surprised about the elephant in the room that everybody was talking about, but we're not talking about it yet. And that is shame.
Yeah.
When I first started doing this, I was so full of myself and invincible. I was listening to all these men talking about shame. I'm thinking, what are you talking about? I don't have any shame. You know, that doesn't exist for me. And it was because it was so entrenched. It was so part of my identity, responded to all these negative messages that I got when I was growing up, that I became this super egotistical persona type person. And for me, the definition of shame is about something that I believe I am. So it's me. I am a bad person. I am you know, not good enough. Whereas guilt is I've done a bad thing, or you know, it's something that I can change. And I think that the inner critic, or whatever it's called, or the imposter syndrome, is hidden behind, and this is what I was trying to say in the last time I spoke, I think it's hidden behind that veil of shame that is invisible. It's like magical. It's weird. And it's only through having these conversations that we can, and you've shared an example of what you do with your clients there, Ashley. I use the archetypes in a similar way. You know, most people that come to see me, they're inflated magician and inflated warrior, and they're exhausted.
Yeah.
They're never switching off up here, and they're always driven. They're always driven. There's no sovereign at all.
No.
And the wound obviously always comes from the lover, from childhood, or from a message that they've got. And it's about helping guide people around these different energies and these different sort of parts of us. And I heard Steve talking about the parts as well. And for me, the archetypes is a common language that we speak about through MKP, but also, you know, creative ways of talking about it, like Joseph was talking about his heckler at the back, you know, or high up. You know, that's the inflated, again, it's inflated magician. So there's a lot of dancing goes on, and a lot of unpicking and slowing down goes on, in my experience, to help people relate to and unpick where these voices come from. And they're usually hidden behind a veil of shame, I think, an invisible wall of shame.
Yeah, and I think the important thing about shame is it could. I love Brené Brown. I did a lot of work on my shame a number of years ago, and I spent hours and hours listening to this woman. She's done so much good work around shame, and one of the things that really hit me was she said it can only exist in silence. She said, as soon as you start talking about your shame and you share it, all of a sudden the feeling goes away, and you think, oh wow, what a relief. I don't have to hold that anymore. I don't have to beat myself up anymore because I've just let it go. And yeah, it's a key. Just start sharing it with whoever feels safe to you.
Ashley, my friend, you have just hit on the core center part of every single addiction and every 12-step program. It's all hidden. It's all hidden, you know. It's people.
Yeah.
I isolate in addiction, and I take it out myself, and it's all hidden. So you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there. Oh, Brené Brown has. We'll give her.
Yes.
For me,
sorry, Joe, go on.
For me, all of this is so congruent with my understanding of the work that I've witnessed and that I've seen in the different groups, and of my own work. And I'm a big fan of Brené Brown as well. And her whole thing is vulnerability, right? And her research was vulnerability, and people were like, "This is where the shift is at."
Yeah.
And if I can add a small point on a kind of physiological point of view, or from a physiological aspect of this, because I think the archetypes in our physiology are really interlinked. I think they. I am of the belief, and I make up this belief, that the archetypes are really in a reptilian part of our brain. They're a really, really old part of our brain, and they can be really helpful. You know, they can be that bit which is keeping us safe and has kept us safe at a time in our life, and it's a learned behavior. And there's that learned behavior, which is the autonomic nervous system, which is fight and flight. And that's kind of using a set of software in order to keep us safe, to get our needs and our wants met. And it has aspects that are also like freeze and fawn, you know? So stay silent, stay quiet, don't move, don't be seen. And fawn is like that people pleaser. You know, I'm going to go out of my way and trip over myself to be really, really, really likable. So I'll be included and I won't be separate. But like, that's exhausting. You know, that can be really, really exhausting. And like software, like it's valid for a certain amount of time, right? Like, I don't know about you guys, but probably no one's using Windows 95 anymore. Probably, you know?
I mean, what's wrong with Windows 95?
There's only a few of us that were alive in 95.
Oh, maybe I'm tricking everybody here. We're going to have a clearing around that. Sorry. I use a Mac, so, you know, but like it's valid for a certain amount of time, right? Yeah. And then it's like all the other stuff. Like, you know, I don't know, would Windows 95, would it run Zoom? I don't know. I'm not a techie guy. But like we have to update it. It's valid for a certain amount of time, and then we need to refresh. Exactly.
Yeah, software refresh.
Exactly. That the hardware we use, and you know, the reptilian brain, that's been with us for 300,000 years, and that's been before that. It's been with us for millions and billions, and it's pretty useful. Hardware we're running it is standard, but the software, like we can update that, we can refresh that. That's
Great.
my point.
Nice.
Thanks, good. Okay, so I'm gonna just jump in here. This is crazy because we've got a hard stop now, and we've only just started. It's not even the tip of the iceberg, right? And I feel let's get into serious flow, but we do have a commitment for Joseph to get out of here, yeah, we'll set aside some more time for this. So we're just gonna time out on this conversation right now, even though there's that much more to do. Thank you all for showing up.
Thank you.
Thanks for getting so involved. I mean, I know I'm feeling it too. I feel like this is not finished. I feel like this is, do you know what I mean? It's like having sex and I'm only halfway through. Like I'm not even, like, how do I stop doing this right now?